Дорогі українці,
Dear Ukrainians, Russia is waging its special operation to undermine our fighting spirit and bend to compromises. Their goal is to create a quasi-state with a pro-Moscow administration. The Russian newspaper Komsomolskaya Pravda became the source and the voice of this propaganda. Its audience is the average Russian who is not interested in politics and does take all the nonsense and lies produced by Kremlin as truth. There is no need to remind that back in 2014, Komsomolskaya Pravda was awarded by the Kremlin for informational help during the occupation of Crimea. They used fake authors and experts to dump the idea of tearing Ukraine into the media space. They created the so-called framework of compromise to push among Ukrainians the feeling of despair, inevitability, that there will be no more sovereign state of Ukraine. Those scenarios propose to turn Ukraine into a failed state which needs a Russian protectorate with Russian as the state language, political neutrality, a state which lost Crimea, Donbass forever, etc. Another scenario is to create several states on the territory of Ukraine, and by the way, borders of these new states, which would be created by the Kremlin's desire, are absolutely matching propaganda cliches spread by Russia as early as in 2004 in the times of the Orange Revolution. At that time, during the election campaign, Russian political technologists led by Timofey Sergeytsov worked with Viktor Yanukovych, ousted ex-president of Ukraine, and created a narrative about three sorts of Ukrainians. So those new borders of new states on the territory of Ukraine coincide with that narrative on 204, and now this scenario is spread by the voice of Kremlin propaganda such as newspaper Komsomolskaya Pravda. The third scenario is that Ukraine will not exist as a state. Those scenarios are constructed by Kremlin. It's not journalism. The author of those scenarios has never written about Ukraine nor about Russian politics. He was born somewhere in the Russian city of Sverdlovsk, lived in the far northern Russian region of Kolyma. He wrote articles about real estate and his own experiments with vaccination. After trying to scare Ukrainians with their scenarios of tearing apart, Kremlin created the fourth scenario, which was voiced by the non-existent political scientist. It is about the so-called desired by Russia compromise. What is it about? Ukraine has to lose occupied Crimea and Donbass forever. The president of Ukraine should be removed. New elections must be held. Also, new authorities that suit the Russian ruling should be imposed. And whom do they propose as a new governor? Don't laugh. First of all, they propose an ex-president of Ukraine fled to Russia, Viktor Yanukovych. This scenario has been prepared several weeks ago. For example, back in start of 2022, Yanukovych unexpectedly appealed to the court decisions, time limits on which had been already expired a long time ago. Once that regard his resignation from the presidency and the removal from his presidential status. The statute of limitations in these decisions is a half year. Instead, he took legal action after 8 years. It means that he for sure knew something. But there is one more personality to lead Ukraine except for Yanukovych. Please don't laugh again. This is Mykola Azarov, Prime Minister in times of Yanukovych's presidency. They are saying it directly, calling him head of the Committee for the Salvation of Ukraine in Exile in Moscow, as well as Ukraine's shadow prime minister. It is also symbolism in trying to seize Kharkiv. First of all, it was the first capital of Soviet Ukraine, and 2022 is the century anniversary for the USSR creation. Moreover, before Yanukovych and Azarov had plans for Kharkiv. Let me remind you that at the time of the Revolution of Dignity, Yanukovych fled to Kharkiv planning to declare it the temporarily capital of Ukraine and invite Russian authority to send in troops to establish order in Ukraine. There is one more interesting fact about another candidate for the so-called temporary leader of Ukraine, Mykola Azarov. So when Yanukovych, during the last days of his presidency, fled Azarov suddenly boarded a private jet and flew to St. Petersburg. Then he was brought to Putin's residence in Valdai, in Novgorod region. It is not a mere assertion. This information was obtained during the investigation of the crimes committed during the Revolution of Dignity and proved by many sources. We can just guess what Putin and Azarov talked about back in February 2014, but what we can see is that they were acting purposefully and acting on their vision of Ukraine. Back then, after speaking to Putin at Valdai, Azarov came to Kharkiv, but there he failed to take power in his hands because the scenario had become irreversible. The deputy of the Party of Regions, Yevgen Murayev, brought Azarov by car to the Russian city of Belgorod. That's how he left the territory of Ukraine, and now, with the help of Russia, maybe he has plans to come back in the status of the governor to the territory of Ukraine. Dear Ukrainians, all these phantom pains of Russian authorities, efforts to pull an old from naphthalene, worn-out staff deck, 2004 scenarios, show that Russian power totally misunderstands the realities in which we Ukrainians live now in 2022. It is the same if one takes Lenin out of the mausoleum and puts him govern Russia. That's why Ukraine remains strong, united, and fights back at the front and information battlefield.
Дякую за увагу.